Playing with fire. Bentham's concept of deep play, is found in his The Theory of Legislation. By it he means play in which the stakes are so high that it is, from his utilitarian standpoint, irrational for the man to engage in it at all. If a man whose fortune is 1,000 pounds or ringgit weighs 500 of it on an even bet, the marginal utility of the pound he stands to win is clearly less than the marginal utility of the one he stands to lose. In genuine deep play, this is the case for both parties. They are both in over their heads. Having come together in search of pleasure, they have entered into a relationship which will bring the participants considered collectively net pain rather than net pleasure. Bentham's conclusion was therefore that deep play was immoral from first principles, and a typical step for him should be prevented legally. But more interesting than the ethical problem, at least for our concerns here, is that despite the logical force of Bentham's analysis, men do engage in such play, both passionately and often, and even in the face of law's revenge. For Bentham and those who think as he does, nowadays mainly lawyers, economists, and a few psychiatrists, the explanation is, as I have said, that such men are irrational, addicts, fetishists, children, fools, savages, who need only to be protected against themselves. But for the Balinese, though naturally they do not formulate it in so many words, the explanation lies in the fact that in such play, money is less a measure of utility, had or expected, than it is a symbol of moral import, perceived or imposed. It is, in fact, in shallow games, one in which smaller amounts of money are involved, that increments and decrements of cash are more nearly synonyms for utility and disutility, in the ordinary, unexpected sense, for pleasure and pain, happiness and unhappiness. In deep ones, where the amounts of money are great, much more is at stake than marginal gain, namely esteem, honor, dignity, respect. In a word, though in Bali a profoundly frigid word, status. It is at a stake symbolically. For a few cases of ruined addict gamblers aside, no one's status is actually altered by the outcome of a cockfight. It is only that momentarily affirmed or insulted. But for Balinese, for whom nothing is more pleasurable than an offer obliquely delivered, or more painful than one obliquely received, particularly when mutual acquaintances, undeceived by surfaces, are watching, such a oppressive drama is deep indeed. This is much stressed immediately. Is not to say that the money does not matter, or that the Balinese is more concerned about losing 500 ringgits than 15. Such a conclusion will be absurd. It is because money does, in this hardly unmaterialistic society, matter and matter very much, that the more of it one risks, the more of a lot of other things, such as one's pride, one's poise, one's dispassion, one's masculinity, one also risks, again only momentarily, but again very publicly as well. In depth cockfights, an owner and his collaborators, and as we shall see, to a lesser but still quite real extent also their backers on the outside, put their money where their status is. It is in large part because the marginal disutility of loss is so great at the higher levels of betting that to engage in such betting is to lay one's public self, allusively and metaphorically, through the medium of one's cock on the line. And though to a Bentamid this might seem merely to increase the rationality of the enterprise, that much further, to the ballinist, what it mainly increases in the meaningfulness of it all. And as to follow Weber rather than Bentham, the imposition of meaning on life is the major and primary condition of human existence. That access of significance more than compensates for the economic cost is involved. Actually, given the even money quality of the larger matches, important changes in material fortune among those who regularly participate in them seem virtually non-existent, because matters more or less even out more the long run. It is actually in the smaller, shallow fights where one finds the handful of more pure addict type gamblers involved, those who are in it mainly for the money, that real changes in social position, largely downward, are affected. Men of these sort plungers are highly dispraised by true cockfighters as fools who do not understand that the sport is all about. Vulgarians who simply miss the point of it all. They are these addicts regarded as fair games for the genuine enthusiasts, those who do understand to take a little money away from something that is easy enough to do by luring them through the force of their greed into irrational bets on mismatched cocks. Most of them do indeed manage to ruin themselves in a remarkably short time, but there always seems to be one or two of them around, pawning their land and selling their clothes in order to bet at any particular time. This graduated correlation of status gambling with deeper fights and inversely money gambling with shallower ones is in fact quite general. Bettors themselves form a socio-moral hierarchy in these terms. As noted earlier, at most cockfights, there are around the very edges of the cockfight area a large number of midless, sheer dance type gambling games, roulette, dice through, coin spin, pea under the shell, operated by concessionaries. Only women, children, adolescents, and various other sorts of people who do not yet fight cocks are the extremely poor, the socially despised, the personally idiosyncratic, play at these games at, of course, penny and levels. Cockfighting men will be ashamed to go anywhere near them. Slightly above these people in standing are those who, though they do not themselves fight cocks, bet on the smaller matches around the edges. Next, there are those who fight cocks in small or occasionally medium matches, but have not the status to join in the large ones, though they may bet from time to time to on the side in those. And finally, there are those, the really substantial members of the community, the solid citizenry around whom local life revolves, who fight in the larger fights and bet on them around the side. The focusing element in these focused gatherings, these men generally dominate and define the sport as they dominate and define the society. When a Balinese male talks in that almost venerative way about the true cockfighter, the Bebato Betor or Jurud Gurung casekeeper, it is this sort of person, not those who bring the mentality of the pea and shell game into the quite different, inappropriate context of the cockfight. The driving gambler, potted, a word which has the secondary meaning of thief or reprobate, and the wishful hanger-on that they mean for such a man that is really going on in a match in something rather closer to an affaire d'honneur, though with the Balinese talent for practical fantasy, the blood that is spilled is only figuratively human, than to the stupid mechanical crank and crank of a slot machine. What makes Balinese cockfighting deep is thus not money in itself, but what the more of it that is involved, the more so money causes should happen. The migration of the Balinese status hierarchy into the body of the cockfight. Psychologically, an Aesopian representation of the ideal demonic, rather narcissistic male self. Sociologically, it is an equal Aesopian representation of the complex fields of tension set up by the controlled, muted, ceremonial, but for all that deeply felt interaction of those selves in the context of everyday life. The cocks may be surrogates for their owners' personalities, animal mirrors of psychic form, but the cockfight is, or more exactly deliberately, is made to be a simulation of the social matrix, the involved system of cross-cutting, overlapping, highly corporate groups, villages, king groups, irrigation societies, temple congregation, castes, in which its devotees live, and as prestige, the necessity to affirm it, defend it, celebrate it, justify it, and just plain bask in it, but not given the strongest ascriptive character of Balinese stratification to seek it, is perhaps the central driving force in the society. So also ambulant penises, blood sacrifices, and monetary exchanges aside, it is of the cockfight. This apparent amusement and seeming sport is, to take another phrase from Irving Goffman, a status bloodbath. The easiest way to make this clear, and at least to some degree to demonstrate it, is to invoke the village whose cockfighting activities is observed the closest, the one in which the raid occurred and from which my statistical data are taken. Like all Balinese villages, this one, Tihingam, in the Klungkun region of Southeast Bali, is intricately organized, a labyrinth of alliances and oppositions, but unlike many, two sorts of corporate groups, which are also status groups, particularly stand out, and we may concentrate on them in a powerful whole way without undue distortion. First, the village is dominated by four large patrilineal, partly endogamous descent groups which are constantly vying with one another and form the major factions in the village. Sometimes the group 2 and 2, or rather the two larger ones versus the two smaller ones, plus all the unaffiliated people. Sometimes they operate independently. There are also subfactions within them, subfactions within the subfactions, and so on to rather fine levels of distinction. And second, there is the village itself, almost entirely endogamous, which is opposed to all the other villages around about in its cockfight circuit, which, as explained, is the market region, but which also forms alliances with certain of these neighbors against certain others in various supra-village political and social contexts. The exact situation is thus, as everywhere in Bali, quite distinctive. But the general pattern of a tiered hierarchy of status rivalries between highly corporate but various based groupings, and thus between the members of them, is entirely general. Consider then, as support of the general thesis that the cockfight, and especially the deep cockfight, is fundamentally a dramatization of status concerns, the following facts, which, to avoid extended ethnographic description, I shall simply pronounce to be facts. Though the concrete evidence, examples, statements, and numbers that could be brought to bear in support of them is both extensive and unmistakable. 1. A man virtually never bets against a cock owned by a member of his own kind group. Usually he will feel obligated to bet for it, the more so the closer the kind tie and the deeper the fight. If he is certain in his mind that he will not win, he may just not bet at all, particularly if it is only a second cousin's bird of it, or if the fight is a shallow one. But as a rule, he will feel he must support it, and in deep games nearly always does. Thus the great majority of the people calling five or speculate so demonstratively are expressing their allegiance to their kinsman, not their evaluation of his birth, their understanding or probability theory, or even their hopes or unearned income. 2. This principle is extended logically. If your kin group is not involved, you will support an allied kin group against an unallied one in the same way, and so on through the very involved networks of alliances which, as I said, make up any other Balinese village. So, 2. For the village as a whole, if an outsider cock is fighting any cock from your village, you will tend to support the local one. If what is a rather circumstance, but occurs every now and then, a cock from outside your cockfight circuit is fighting one inside, you will also tend to support the home bird. 4. Cocks which come from any distance are almost always favorites, for the theory is the man who will not have dared to bring it if it was not a good cock, the more so the further he has come. His followers are, of course, obligated obliged to support him, and when the more grand-scale legal cockfights are held on holidays and so on, the people of the village take what they regard to be the best cocks in the village, regardless of the ownership, and go off to support them, although they will almost certainly have to give odds on them and to make large bets to show that they are not a sheepscape village. Actually, such away games, though infrequent, tend to mend the ruptures between village members, and the constantly occurring home games, where village factions are opposed rather than united, exacerbate